Hey everybody, welcome back to Terry On. My name is Mandy. I'm your host. We've made it to episode 3, and I'm really happy to be back with you. I was very sick last week and lost my voice, which made it a little inconvenient to record a podcast episode. The goal is to have one a week and have it drop on Wednesdays, but I did miss last week because of that. But here we are, and I'm really happy to be here. I thought we'd start out with a segment called Weird Things People Have Said to My Face. So I was remembering this weekend we somehow dug out our old yearbooks. And that was really fun to not only reminisce, but also to just read the things that people wrote in my yearbook. And someone that I dated, but I don't think we were dating at the time that he signed it. He wrote, Amanda, by the way, my full name is Amanda. So Amanda, you have the most potential of anyone I know to be a wonderful person. Wait, what? I have potential to be a wonderful person. I'm not there, but I could be there if I just work really hard. If I work hard, that's probably why he didn't stick around, but I have the potential of anyone he knows to be wonderful. So that felt good. I cannot remember what 17-year-old Mandy thought when she read that. I hope she thought it was stupid, but maybe not. I probably thought it was a compliment. Another weird thing someone actually said to my face. Olive was 2 and Clementine was a baby, and we were at the park, and I ran into somebody who I hadn't seen in a couple years, but we knew each other just from the teaching world when I was a teacher. And she came up to me and she was like, oh my gosh, your baby's beautiful. Oh my word. And Olive, she is gorgeous. Does she look like her dad? And I was most people say she looks like me, but I guess, I don't know, maybe, but also that hurt my feelings. What? Why did you say that? Oh, man. And the thing was, she's so nice. So there's not a part of me that believes that she meant it to be rude. I just thought it was so funny that someone actually said that out loud. Anyway, stay tuned for the next episode of things people actually said to my face, because the list is long, my friends, and hilarious. So here we are, week 3, and a lot has been going on in the last couple weeks, and I want to stay committed to talking about the things that I feel like I'm growing in, because I think that's what's at least helpful for me, and hopefully it's helpful for you too, because it's real, it's current, it's not just a story from 10 years ago. It's literally what I'm living right now. And so in the last couple weeks, I've had 2 scenarios in different parts, different circles of my life, where there were some unmet expectations, there were some misunderstandings, and there may have even been triggering situations, or maybe an opportunity to be offended. Okay, both scenarios had the same recipe. One scenario was met with curiosity, the space to talk, questions where feedback was offered, and invited. And the other conversation was met with what I thought was an understanding of, okay, we'll keep this conversation going. Neither one of us is offended. This is just feedback that's being offered. But what I later found out in a couple days was actually there was no room to make that conversation go further. There was clearly offense. There was clearly misunderstanding. And when I reached out to clear the air, it was met with zero response, which I would call stonewalling, right? Ignoring someone's bid for connection, bid for reconciliation is called stonewalling. And it's a response that keeps any form of reconciliation from happening. And I Look at these two examples that happened like at the same time in my life. And I don't think I showed up perfectly to either one of them. But in my imperfections, one was met with space to work it out and space to I think for both of us to see areas we could both grow, for both of us to see that maybe neither one of us handled things perfectly. And then the other scenario was met with, because you didn't handle that conversation perfectly, Mandy, there's no room, there's no moving forward. And without saying it, I'm drawing a line, because when you reach out for reconciliation, especially with Christians, a pillar of our Christian faith is literally reconciliation. We have been reconciled to Christ, not through our own deserving of it or our own actions, but because of his kindness. And a pillar of our faith is that we would be people that would offer second chances, third, fourth, fifth, that we would be people that are quick to reconcile and quick to release offense. And so in my world, I can't think of a scenario where someone would reach out and say, hey, I'd like to clear the air between us, and I would say no to that. Just in my world, right? Even my ex-husband, this past fall, we stood on the sidewalk after a custody conference, and after 9 years of going in and out of court and having a very, what I would call, tumultuous co-parenting relationship, started having a conversation with me. Someone who I think, and he admitted, mistreated me for a long time in the co-parenting world, wanted to have a conversation. And I said, absolutely. Did he do everything perfectly to earn that conversation? Not at all. But what is my faith if it doesn't inform me of how I respond to people? What is it then? It's nothing. If my faith doesn't actually inform all these little everyday decisions, then I don't actually know what it is. And so when the person who, what I would categorize as if you talk about having enemies, quote unquote enemies, my ex-husband for so long wants to have a conversation, and I say yes, and it literally is the open door to reconciliation. It literally is the open door to apologies. I mean, it happened right there on the sidewalk. And we have been co-parenting so much better since that day. But what if I just stayed offended? What if I told him that we just need to move on and not talk about anything? That's not real peace, and it's not real reconciliation, and we would have never gotten to where we are today, where I literally feel like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. I literally feel peace in my heart, and it came from a clunky conversation at the end of years and years and years and years of pain. And so I'm just not sure that there's ever a time that anybody's going to come to me. If I can have a conversation with who I would call probably my biggest enemy for many years, and again, this isn't to throw him under the bus, because equally I was probably his biggest enemy. But if I'm going to say yes to that and work through the clunkiness of that and that actual deep pain of someone who actually hurt me, I can't imagine a scenario where a coworker would reach out, a friend would reach out, a relative would reach out and say, hey, could we talk? There's some things I'd like to clear up between us, and I would just ignore them, or I would just say no. I can't think of it. And nor do I believe that that's even part of my faith. I don't think that that's part of being a Christian. I just can't find the basis for it. I can't find the basis for stonewalling someone, refusing to forgive someone. I don't see it. And it makes me skeptical of like, hey, does your faith actually inform how you live? Because it's not just about if you show up on a Sunday and you do church great, or you lead a small group, or you offer to pray at a meeting. Like, okay, but like, what about when it gets weird? What about when it gets uncomfortable? What about when you're faced with someone who might feel like your enemy? What about then? Like, does your faith matter? And so I feel like the last couple weeks, I've been offered this opportunity to do self-reflection, right? This opportunity to look and go, okay, like, what could I do better in these conversations to elicit peace, right? Am I holding offense? Not a fence. Like, I'm not holding up a fence. I'm not that strong. Like, offense, you know what I'm saying? Am I holding on to offense? Am I willing to have hard conversations? Am I willing to forgive? Am I willing to hear someone out? And my answer is a resounding yes. There is just no time that I'm ever going to say, like, you aren't worth giving time to hear more about what happened so we can clear the air. I'm just never going to respond that way. And I think that is the way you find real peace. I do think that is the way you find. So we talk about people having anxiety. I think part of our anxiety is probably because we're living with dishonest harmony. We say things like, let's just move on, let's put it behind us. But that's without actually having a conversation. That's actually without being able to name the thing that hurt you. That's actually without a conversation where any apologies are offered and forgiveness is offered. Saying, let's just move on. But there's one of you in that needs to talk about something. Even if there's just one of you that needs to talk. I think, in my unprofessional opinion, I think then we need to set the stage for allowing someone to talk. Because dishonest harmony is only going to create anxiety. Because the very next time, it's like putting a Band-Aid over a wound. The very next time you bump up into each other, that Band-Aid's going to slip off and that wound is going to hurt because that wound has never been healed. And we can't heal what we don't talk about. We can't fix what we don't know is wrong. So years ago, I had a therapist tell me that I had the opportunity as a mom to give my kids the gift of learning what it's like to give feedback in a healthy relationship. Some of us grew up in houses where we couldn't speak up ever, that it was disrespectful as a kid to speak up. It wasn't okay. And so over time, we learned that our voice didn't matter, or we were scared, or whatever. And so we realized that in order to stay in good standing with people we care about, we needed to be quiet about things that actually needed soothed and comforted and healed. And you do that long enough, and you become an adult that does not know how to have hard conversations. And so my therapist said, hey, I think you could give your kids a real gift, and that is allowing them to offer you feedback. Of course, it needs to be respectful, and you can train them on how to do it. Like, that's my job. I'm a parent. I'm teaching them how to be like contributing citizens and be emotionally intelligent. So it's your job to train them on how to deliver the feedback. But you're going to give them this gift where they start practicing with a healthy adult what it looks like to give feedback and what your response is. So a healthy response to feedback, right, is when I overreact to one of my children, my other children have the right to speak up and say, hey, Mom, I think you were a little hard on her. So this one time we went to Target, and I forget how old they were, but I think Junie was probably only 3 or 4, and the other girls then wouldn't have been older than like 8 or 10. And so we're in Target. I'm like very hungry, but I'm not saying that, right? But I just, looking back, I'm like, okay, I was very hungry. The kids were just like, they had energy, but nothing was crazy. And so I'm like so stressed out this whole trip. We get out to the car and I just announce, I make this declaration, we're never going to Target again, which is like literally so untrue. I was there probably the next morning. Like I love Target a lot. And so anyway, I make this declaration, like we're never going to Target again. And they just all looked at me. And Olive couldn't have been more than like 10. And she was like, literally, Mom, what did I do that would get this kind of declaration? And I was like, okay, you asked for cheese dip and that bothered me. She's like, okay, I'm sorry I asked for it, but like I thought we could ask for things. I didn't like put it in the cart. And I was like, okay, solid point, fine. I'm not mad at you. You're allowed back at Target. And then Clementine was like, what did I do? And I was like, well, I can't think of anything, so fine, you can go back to Target. And Junie was like, but what did I do? And I was like, Junie, you were wild. You were underneath the cart. You were like flopping around. And I don't know, I was like naming all these things. And Olive just looks at me and she's like, Mom, do you think you just might be hungry? And I was like, yeah, probably. Fine. Everybody's allowed back at Target again. And I go home and I put the frozen pizza in the oven that I bought and I get it out. And it's this moment where I'm finally going to like get my blood sugar right. And it tips over and flips cheese side down on the glass oven door. And I thought to myself, no, 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 no. And I pick up the crust and I scrape the cheese off the door like a barbarian and plop it back on the pizza just in piles. And I eat that pizza. And I ate it and my blood sugar went back up and I had a lot of clarity and I said sorry to everybody. So, the moral of that story is my kids had an opportunity to give me feedback and they weren't wrong. Like, I really was frustrated for reasons that weren't really anything to do with them. And had they not been given the freedom to ask questions or offer feedback or let me know like, hey, I think you might actually just be hungry, we would have had a ban on Target that made no sense. And so I practice this with my kids and it's not that fun. I want to be honest, like I have to eat a lot of humble pie. They'll say things like, Mom, was that really a battle you needed to pick? Or like, hey, Mom, fix your face. You should smile. I mean, maybe they don't say fix your face. That sounds rude. My kids are not like disrespectful in the way they do it. I think it's hilarious if they tell me to fix my face, but because they're not wrong. And so we practice this culture all the time of like offering honest feedback and being in a place. So like this other time, right? Okay, so here's a perfect example. Typically when you correct kids, they fight you on it, right? When you're like, hey, you don't need to do that. You are bothering your sister. No, I'm not. She's bothering me, right? It's like that kind of response. Well, this one time Clementine was doing something and I forget what was happening, but it was like bothering her sister. And so then when her sister did it back to her and she got upset, I literally said to her like, Clem, you see that what you just did to her, she's doing back and now you're annoyed. But she was annoyed with you and you didn't get it. And Clem looked at me, she goes, huh, I didn't even think about that. Okay, yeah, you're right. Wouldn't this be a lovely world if we all responded like Clementine did in that moment? And you know what's so funny? In our family now, we all just respond that way about stuff. When somebody gives some sort of feedback, we go, huh, I didn't even think about that. And it like takes this edge off of needing to be defensive or offended. And so we have this culture in our house of giving feedback. And I hope I'm giving my kids this gift that like, it's okay for you to go into the world and offer feedback that isn't malicious. It's not meant to hurt someone. It's literally meant to make things better. Might be uncomfortable, but it's literally meant to make things better. And I hope that's what I'm offering them because that is the only thing that brings true peace. We have peace between us and not this anxious attachment between us because there's nothing off limits for us to talk about. You know how there's a lot of families that talk about like, I understand it, right? Even just from the way I grew up, like there's certain things you just don't talk about that you would never bring up to your parents. You would never bring up to anybody in your family. Just there are certain things that you just can't say. There's certain ways you can't act because you kind of understand these unspoken family rules. And it creates an anxious attachment between you and people you care about, because you don't actually ever know really where you stand, or you don't know if you'd still be loved if you brought this topic up, or if you talked about this thing, or if they knew how you felt about it. And so what I hope I'm offering my kids is like a secure attachment, a secure relationship where they do not need to worry about what is being brought up, because even if they bring it up in the wrong way, it will never, ever end our connection. And I hope this is what we can take into our workplaces and into our relationships, that even if people don't get it right, that we would offer a second chance, we would offer grace, because the only reason we don't is because we do not recognize the amount we've been forgiven, the amount of grace we've received in our own humanity that has hurt people along the way. Like, we have been the person hurting someone, or saying something the wrong way, or miscommunicating and causing unnecessary pain or offense or whatever it is. We've been on that side of it. And so when we're on the receiving end of a conflict, may we all remember that we were once on the other side. And none of us is above giving someone an opportunity to make things right. Like, there's just, in my mind, there's just no scenario where that happens. And maybe we're scared. Maybe we're scared to have a conversation because conflict freaks us out. And I understand that conflict freaked me out for a really long time. But when everything fell apart and I went through I went through a divorce, and I'll say, leading up to our divorce, my ex-husband and I never fought. Like, we never fought. And yet I ended up divorced. Because in a relationship where there's no conflict, somebody isn't being honest. And it's only a matter of time until that ticking bomb explodes. And so we got divorced after what looked like a very good marriage. In my mind, it was good for Mandy because there was no conflict. But it wasn't good for my ex-husband because he squashed everything he felt and believed and every disagreement he had. That's called dishonest harmony. And it's only a matter of time till that blows up. And it would have been better, I think, if we could have talked about it, but he didn't know how to, and I didn't know how to receive it. Like, he couldn't bring it up, and I couldn't answer with grace or kindness, because in the very few instances that he tried to bring up stuff that bothered him, my response was not kind and caring. It was more of like a get over it response. And I was in my 20s. I don't believe I knew better at the time, but I know better now. And I do things differently now. And I look at that and I think, wow, two people who never fought. Wouldn't you think that's peace? How did it end in divorce? Well, because it's not true peace. True peace comes from finding unity in the midst of your diversity. You find unity even though you're so different. That is like the mark of peace. It's the mark of maturity. And I do think it's the mark of somebody who is a person of faith, somebody who's following God and letting their faith inform their everyday life. And so I want to be on a journey towards real peace. My marriage now, my 2.0 marriage, well, I guess 2.0 would insinuate it's the same marriage as 2.0 version. So my second marriage, I don't even have a catchy way to say it, is so different than my first marriage. We talk about everything. We are honest. And listen, there's a lot of complicated topics. There's exes involved. There's parenting that we see things differently sometimes. We're from two different cultures. We are very different in many, many ways. And we've lived very different lives. But the only way that this relationship is going to have true peace, where I really trust my husband and he really trusts me, especially after both of us experienced infidelity and betrayal, right? So we're coming together already with our brains wired to distrust each other. The only way we're going to find true peace is very honest conversations. And they're not mean and they're not to hurt each other. They're literally that we're committed to telling the truth about what's going on inside of each of us. So I'm responsible to say, here's what's going on inside of me. Here's how I feel. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling anxious. I'm whatever it is, or I'm feeling very triggered about this thing. And whatever it is, it's my responsibility to say what's going on inside of me, and it's his to say what's going on inside of him. And this is the only way that we're going to find true peace. And I have more peace in this marriage because I'm committed not only to honesty, but I'm also committed to surrender. And in my first marriage, I wasn't committed really to either of those. I had a lot of walls up, and I didn't really know what it meant to like yield to kindness and yield to grace and yield to the most generous interpretation of someone else that I could come up with. I didn't know how to yield to like the fruits of the Spirit in my life. And in this marriage, I feel like I'm learning it. It's not easy, especially post like betrayal, when like it's not easy to just default to trust. It's not easy to default to the best case scenario. But I don't want to live with anxiety. I don't want to live with a wall between us. And I certainly don't want to end up divorced again, mainly because there's not an honest foundation between us. And I think honesty, there's like a cruel honesty, right? Where you say things that are hurtful that you haven't like thought through. Is it helpful? Is it necessary? You know, those things you're supposed to think through before you say things out loud. I think there can be cruel honesty. That's really when you're telling the other person what you think about them. That's cruel honesty sometimes, right? The honesty I'm talking about is honesty about yourself. Eating humble pie and saying the thing about yourself that takes just even a shred of humility and self-awareness, where you can say, I'm afraid that you don't think I'm a good leader of my team. I'm afraid that you don't take me seriously because I didn't finish college. I'm afraid you don't think I know how to do this job because I've only been here for a few months. You know, whatever it is. Like, that's what honesty is. It's not telling the other person, like, you know, you're like really hard to deal with. We like don't even enjoy when you walk into the break room. Like, that's not the honesty I'm talking about. This commitment to being honest about yourself. And I find that it opens up the door for other people to be honest back, right? When you lead with that. And that's what I'll say about that conversation number one that I opened this with. The person I was talking to, as we were stumbling through some misunderstandings and missed expectations, I want to say, like, it's because of her that we even made it through that conversation, because she was committed to asking good questions. She was committed to telling the honest truth about herself. She was committed to repeating things back to me of like, I think this is what I heard. Is this what I heard? Is there anything else? Like, it was a very walls down, non-offensive conversation, and it invited me to show up the same. And I learned from that. I thought about that this week, and I thought, man, did I show up as my best self? And I don't know if I did. And so my takeaway from the conflicts that I had this week is I always want to offer people space to be imperfect, space to apologize. I want to be an apologizer. I never want there to be a limit where somebody feels like our relationship is too far gone or I've done something too wrong to ever make it right again. I've lived through enough like painful things and broken relationships that have mended over time, that I just can't imagine a scenario where it would ever be appropriate to shut someone out. And so if your natural bend is to stonewall, is to just brush things under the rug, to move forward, to not give someone the opportunity to talk about the things that they need to talk about with you, it might be tricky to feel like you're ever truly connected to anyone on a deep level, that anybody might actually truly know you. And so what if you were brave enough this week to allow those conversations to happen and just see what happens, see what healing could happen. And if you're the kind of person that doesn't know how to show up to a clunky conversation and still stay open and gracious, maybe start practicing inside your family or with your kids, like my therapist told me, of like just allowing them to give you feedback, because it's going to sting and you're going to have to eat humble pie, especially if they're right. And it's going to help strengthen you to have conversations with people outside your family that go clunky. And maybe your family's not the right place to start. Maybe you and your family definitely cannot do this, but find the safest place to practice this, where you can start practicing receiving and giving feedback and start navigating what that feels like and what it looks like. And, you know, if you're a Christian, if you're a person of faith, like, we have to invite the Holy Spirit into our life every day, in every moment. And there's always an opportunity to ask the question of like, was there a better way? Was there a way I could have shown more love? Was there a way that I need to make this right, or whatever? That is what our faith looks like in action. That is actually what it means to be a follower, like an active Christian, is to let it inform your daily life. It's not just that you're good at leading a Bible study or whatever. It's that you actually let it inform the parts of your life that feel mundane and not related to Christianity or not related to church. But I would argue that there's no part of your life that's not spiritual. There's no part of your life that's not related to your faith. It's all subject to, okay, but what does our faith say about this? What does God say about this? And then finding the humility and the strength and the courage, hopefully, to follow through on that. And I think if we start doing that, if we start finding the courage to like eat some humble pie and practice feedback and get rid of this idea of harmony at all costs, like as far as like, when I say that, I mean, you're happy if no one's fighting, but let our new goal be, we're happy if everyone feels heard and validated and like given a second chance. Like, that's our goal, right? Is to create a space for us to move through conflict in a way that actually is redemptive, instead of, can't we all just be happy? Can't we just all forget about this? Can't you just be easy? And I hope that brings more peace in your relationships. I hope that takes down walls, and I hope that makes us a brighter light in this world, honestly. Friends, thanks for joining me for episode 3. I hope you have a peace-filled week. And as always, carry on.